as the geneticists, I think, are all agreed, could certainly lead to considerable results. Of course, for eugenics to take place on any in a rapid way, you would have to be able to control not merely the male genetic factors, but the female, which is, of course, much more difficult, but not impossible, I imagine.
I have one written question here I'd like to read out to you, sir. The population explosion is a grave danger to mankind, yet the right to bear children is a right of free will. The only apparent way to stem this explosion is by some large-scale kind of conditioning or external coercion. Yet this is also a grave danger. Is there any way out of this dilemma?
Well, the way out of the dilemma surely is being pointed out in most countries of the West, where people voluntarily have limited the size of their families. I mean, this has happened without any coercion, unless you call the desire to have a good economic life and to bring up your children well a coercion. But I mean, this has in fact occurred. And I mean, in this country, after having reached a low during the Depression, the birth rate happens to have gone up. But I mean, the point is that the control of the size of families is now completely voluntary here. I mean, or more or less completely voluntary, and which makes it profoundly different from the people in the underdeveloped societies who are still going on producing 10 children because the habit persists that in order for 3 children to survive, you have to produce 10. But now if you produce 10 children, 7 survive because of elementary public health precautions which have been brought in. Hence, of course, the enormous sudden increase. The death rate, which used to be in the upper 30s, as was the birth rate, has now fallen in many of these countries to 15 and 12 and even 10. So naturally there's an enormous increase. But it's certainly going to take some time to get people to change their habits. I mean, psychological inertia is much more powerful than physical inertia. I mean, it's much easier to push a 10-ton truck than a human being.
Mr. Post has one further question here.
You've spoken of the ends to which drugs should not be devoted, such as increasing conformity, making men more content with what is actually an intolerable situation, securing the power of a small elite, and so on. To what ends do you think these drugs should be devoted, granted that we have them?
Well, I mean, I think therapeutically some of them are very valuable. I think already, for example, some of the so-called psychic energizers have done a great deal in the mental field. I mean, I understand from Dr. Nathan Klein, for example, that in very many cases you can use some of these psychic energizers instead of the electroshock therapy. And people say that electroshock therapy doesn't do any harm, but I cannot believe that partial electrocution is good for anybody. And it seems to me a very good thing that if you can get people on a maintenance dose to get them out of these awful catatonic and depressed conditions, which you seem to be able to do. And therefore there are many people, it seems to me, outside institutions who have tendencies in the same direction, which I think a genuine psychic energizer might be, which could be used without harm to people, would be of immense value. There was even, it was stated a few years ago, I remember, that the Russians had a 5-year plan for increasing mental efficiency by chemical means. I don't know whether this has gone on and what they've discovered, but I would think it's probably on the cards that you could increase the span of attention, the amount of time you could concentrate on things, the power of observation and so on, by chemical as well as by educational means. I mean, I think that there are a number of probably quite good things you could do. And then, again, in the case of these very strange substances like psilocybin, and lysergic acid. I think there's a great deal to be said for doing what William James talked about, of getting people to realize that their ordinary sort of common sense view of the world is not the only view, that the universe they inhabit is not the only possible universe, and that there are other very strange universes which some people spontaneously inhabit. I mean, a man like William Blake obviously inhabits an extremely different universe from that which most people inhabit. And I think it's probably very wholesome for people to be permitted to realize this fact, to perceive that the world of the mind is immensely large, and that there are these very strange and extraordinary areas in them, and there are plenty of cases in the literature where these kind of experiences have produced a kind of conversion. The work which is being done at Harvard now by Leary in the prison, in the local prisons in Boston, it's very interesting, a sort of a series of extraordinary conversion experiences among hardened criminals have emerged from this. And here again, there may be, we don't know enough about the subject yet, but there may be possibilities of very great importance here, of sort of removing obstacles. I mean, the justification was stated by Bergson years ago when he was defending William James against his use of nitrous oxide. A number of fellow philosophers thought this was infra dig, that an eminent philosopher should resort to these chemical means, which enabled, James remarked that only under nitrous oxide could he understand what Hegel meant. Bergson said that it must be realized that the experiences which Mr. James describes are not caused by the gas. The gas is merely the occasion. The gas removes certain obstacles which might have been removed equally well by psychological or psychophysical means, the so-called spiritual exercises of the various religions, but can also be removed by these chemical means, and that if you can do so without doing harm to yourself, so much the better. And incidentally, it's one of the great tragedies, I think, in psychological research that James, I think in about 1905, made an experiment with peyote. And as he had a rather weak stomach, all that he got was violent vomiting. He said, "I'm afraid I must take the visions for granted. I got only the nausea." And it's an awful pity. If he'd had a stronger stomach, we should have had this research beginning 50 years ago. But his weak stomach prevented this, and we've had to wait till much later to get this thing really going.
Well, before we close the program, Mr. Delaney, Graduate Student Association, asked me to announce that there'll be a meeting of the Graduate Student Association next Tuesday at noon. Now, I want to express our appreciation to Mr. Huxley on behalf of all of those who are fearful lest our augmented knowledge restrict our understanding. Thank you very much.